So Wendy Purcell, sitting here in Boston.
And Maureen Powers, sitting here in Worcester, Massachusetts.
So thank you so much. I was thinking as we launch our Higher Education Insights podcast, if I was sitting with my university president hat on and you were sitting with your vice president student affairs, student life hat on, I was wondering what we'd be talking about in the midst of COVID today. So I don't know if that's something that you'd be interested in having a conversation about, Maureen.
I think it's the most interesting thing we can talk about.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the thing is that for me, COVID is unprecedented in our lifetime. I don't think there's anyone alive today who could point to a previous incident in history when we've kind of repressed the economy to deal with a health crisis. So this is a humanitarian and an economic crisis, and it's actually reshaping our world in real time. You know, we are living through this moment, and obviously for us in higher education, it's challenging us fundamentally to think about, you know, the new normal for higher education and the sustainability of higher education. And obviously that's something I've been concerned about for a long time, but the thing that's really exercising me now is about how it's revealing some of the inequities in our society, but also the inequalities in higher education. There are some massive fissures and unequal impacts of this crisis. And so I hope we'll touch on those today. I don't know if you have any kind of opening comments about that, but something I really want to talk about is equity today.
Well, I would agree, because it isn't impacting everyone in an equal fashion, even though the coronavirus knows no boundaries. It doesn't respect any boundaries, but it takes a toll in a greater measure on certain populations. And some of that has to do with economic backgrounds, and some of it has to do with the particular role you have. And certainly in higher ed, we'll see that across all of our campuses. Who's affected most, who's at risk most, who's in danger most, who is able to be safe in this environment, both health-wise and economically. And I think that's what we can talk about today.
Definitely. And I think, you know, I'm in some ways heartened that, you know, the sector has turned around in response to this crisis. And, you know, it's a level of change I don't think we've seen ever in our sector. I mean, to go from, for some universities I know, to go from no online to all online in a matter of weeks. I mean, it shows you the untapped change capacity in our universities and colleges, that's for sure. But now we've got to think about the longer term implications, and maybe we should touch on that today, because I mean, I've written and published a lot on disruption and distinctiveness in the sector, but this is a profound period of disruption. And I think as we move into this recovery, we should talk today about when and how we'll open. But I think for some universities and colleges, they're going to be saying, will they open at all? So for us, maybe we can touch on today the impact on teaching and learning and research, and particularly with your expertise, the student experience, and how we can ensure the quality there. But I'm also worrying about where we make these investments now in technology and mental health and student support and all the infrastructure projects we've got planned, whether we stall them, whether we pivot entirely, and also what's happening with our profoundly successful internationalization of higher education. You know, there's going to be so many things that need to happen that we need to rethink. And I know that the sector is very different. So we'll obviously bring to this our own experiences of working in different universities and different countries. So there isn't a one size fits all, but I'm sure we can rehearse some of the things we're thinking about today. I don't know, before we get into the discussion, if there's anything that's front of mind for you.
I think my most front of mind issue, although I am deeply concerned about the economic impact, my real concern is the health and safety component for everyone, and of course students first. But it is immediate and unrelenting, and there are no do-overs. If we don't get the health safety piece of this correct, the rest will collapse. And so it's crucial, I think, for us to maybe start with that as our topic today.
Yeah, I mean, we probably loosely talk about this as a life and death issue, but actually this is a life and death issue. So I agree with you. Let's talk about the health and safety, but particularly our student body. Maybe if you start there, the things that are worrying you, the things that, you know, if we were in our previous roles of president and vice president, student life, you know, what would you be saying to me about that I should be thinking about? And then maybe, you know, we take that on and pick up that bigger issue of equity as well. But yeah, if we get health and safety wrong, there is no plan B, as they say. So,
right.
So kick us off there, Maureen.
Well, I think the obvious issue of distancing has been accomplished by many colleges this spring by sending people home and doing everything online. As you said, people picked up instantaneously. Curriculum committees that may have fought online teaching for years have suddenly overturned, and they're everywhere. But at the end of the day, the great salvation of sending students home so that they are not at risk on a campus has also created some other endangered situations. So some students have gone home to quite unsafe environments. There are populations that have always seen the campus as their rescue space, their safe space. And for them to be at home, it puts them at risk in two ways. One, if there is a predator in the home, that is just the worst possible circumstance for one of our students to have to be in. And because they are now trying to legitimately finish a semester and progress academically, and yet they are now under a high level of anxiety and stress and risk because they're in an unsafe environment in their home. The other component to this that is problematic is students who have financial issues may not have, by going home, health insurance coverage that they would have had by staying on campus, because some of those campus health insurance policies only work in the vicinity, only work in that county or that town where the college is. And so we may have sent them home to be safe, but if they become ill, there may be no financial means of covering or insurance that covers them if they really did get sick and needed to be attended to. So there are important decisions that still have negative consequences, but they had to be made. And I think many colleges followed excellent common sense in sending students home.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as you're speaking, it makes me think how little attention we probably give to the idea of campus as home. You know, because here we are, you know, in a campus environment, and the students, not only are they, you know, going to their classes and having this sense of community, but it's also, as you say, it's their food security, you know, it's their safe space, you know, they have access to Wi-Fi, you know, all over, and so and many of them jobs, you know, it's their income stream, you know, they're on campus doing jobs. So I think the idea of campus as home and how we recreate that sense of community and connection and meet those new, I say new demands, but they're not new demands. They're kind of hidden I think that's the thing for me. COVID is uncovering some of these issues that we kind of know about, but we don't know about in a very overt way. You know, we're aware of them, but we're not aware of just how profound, you know, the impact of campus is as home. So.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the point about their jobs, because this has been devastating financially for some students, because some of them use their 1 or 2 jobs on campus to pay their tuition, and it's part of their financial aid package. And so, although some colleges are refunding tuition and room and board costs that were not used because students were sent away, it doesn't mean that it's made up for the lack of income for these students. And as a result, they are at a higher level of stress. And I know from conversations with colleagues, I'm sure you've heard the same, that students at home are now seeking online mental health counseling, because that used to be something that they accessed on campus. And so their safety is at risk. As you know, many, a very high percentage, 40% or more, students today in the traditional age suffer from anxiety or depression or both. And many of them are medicated, and they have access to that through a campus health center. That's not available to them. And you have them at home, and they're not getting to see a counselor for their 8 weeks of counseling that they would normally take every semester. So how do we provide that? How do we provide response to that? Some friends of mine and colleagues in other places are saying they're getting random calls from students saying, is there anyone I can talk to? Is there a counselor who will speak to me over Zoom? And so this isn't going to go away, because a student with an anxiety concern as a mental health issue is only having that exacerbated under COVID-19. And some who didn't have that anxiety issue are now developing that because of this very alarming pandemic we're facing.
Yeah, and also I think it's going to show up in the sense that just simply isolating a human being, you know, being alone is a major stressor. And I think for many students, you know, they have such a well-developed social support network that would have attenuated some of those mental health issues and would have helped them enormously. And I guess the other thing is they'll be turning to attenuate those stressors with probably, you know, some rather risky behaviors, whether it's drugs or alcohol or other things that people do when they're stressed. So I think that's a concern as well. And some of them will be some of them will be handling deaths in their family, people, whether they, you know,
precisely,
older people that have died early, or maybe even some much younger people who are no longer in their lives, whether it's friends or family. So I think it's a big issue.
And the difficulty around that, because with the pandemic, as you know, in some families there is more than one person passing away as a result of these infections from COVID-19, and they aren't able to grieve properly. There isn't a normal wake or funeral. They aren't able to gather. If they go to religious services at the time of a death, none of those things are being practiced in order to protect everyone else. And even the hospitalization periods for those people are creating more stress and more trauma. I know right now there are some grade school teachers that are being given online training on trauma in order to prepare them to work with their grade school children. It's the kind of thing we need to be thinking about on campuses, about how do we train our staff around the concept of trauma to be dealing with each other and students when they return to campus.
Yeah, I do think there's a sense that, you know, this is a traumatic event, but I think probably, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later, it's both the immediacy of something strange is happening, but I think there will be longer term fears. I mean, as you know, most universities and colleges have already said that their graduation ceremonies aren't going to happen in person. You know, they are graduating virtually. you're also thinking, well, what kind of job market am I going into with the economy so, so challenged? So there's a layering of different real, not just, perceived risk. There's some real risk for these students as they're trying to navigate, this, what was thought to be a short-term crisis, but is now looking at a very long-term economic recession that will follow it. So I think that's going to be interesting. Talk to me though, I think if we were in our previous roles, we'd be talking about, okay, we have this whole list of needs. We can articulate those very carefully, but where would we spend our diminishing dollar? So, they talk about empty dorms, empty balance sheets. And so, we've got a whole host of new needs emerging. I think we should touch on technology, but we're going to have a new suite of demands. So how do we meet some of those demands? I mean, what's the priority?
Well, I think IT is going to be the foundation for everything. I don't think we can, in some cases, an individual college simply may not have the, no pun intended, the bandwidth to handle what they're being asked to handle. If they are going to be teaching, as the Cal State system says, they're going to teach nearly everything online, does your college, does my college, does every college have the ability to handle 455 faculty from their homes, teaching 4 classes every term with 20,000, 10,000, 6,000 students a day, taking connectivity with the college or university campus for granted? And if you extrapolate beyond just the cost of that IT, when you have to look at this crisis level, when you've already lost your auxiliary money, your revenue is not coming in from residence halls, it's not coming in from food service, you're not renting your campus out in the summer for summer camps and conventions, you're operating so far from the black and so close or in the red or dipping into your endowment that it becomes for the president, in your former role, this becomes a situation where I'm glad it's you and not me, even though we all have to share in the decision making, because decisions will have to be made. And if you have someone really good in IT, they could get snatched because someone down the road who needs a really strong IT person may say, I'm from corporate America and I can afford to pay you more than the local college, so I'm going to snatch you right off that role and take you into my fold, because we're not the only game in town trying to function digitally. Everyone is going to try to function digitally for the next year, and so in ways they never imagined. So even our IT staffing could be poached.
But I mean, I think that it strikes me that higher education has come very late to the game of digital. I mean, I think there's still a kind of snobbery about learning online. And I wouldn't say that the recent, although I celebrate, our agility to kind of move from vaguely online to mostly online in a couple of weeks, that's fantastic. But actually, we're not really embracing the real digital teaching and learning pedagogies at all. We're just, zooming our lecture notes into the great Zoom rooms that are out there. But that's not sustainable. That's not what quality education looks like long term. But it did strike me that some of those inequities that we touched on, sending students at home. Yes, you raised the question about health and safety and whether being at home is even safe, or even if some students have a home. But I think just assuming that there's Wi-Fi out there for them, usually there isn't, and they were making do with going to cafes or public spaces, and actually those cafes and public spaces are closed. So I know that some universities and colleges have kind of, they've extended their Wi-Fi coverage out to their car parks, for example. I thought that was very innovative. Some have actually posted out hotspots Some are actually
Yes.
sending out laptops and everything else, and others are saying, I know one of my colleagues in a rural location is saying, well, actually, there's nowhere here that's got Wi-Fi, so we can't, we can't do that. We're posting out material and we're phoning our students. So it depends where you are, but I think that very basic, what has actually become an essential service now is almost like, shouldn't this be something that nationally should be a priority to invest to make sure Wi-Fi is just a basic service like electricity or running water?
Precisely. And it's been able to be skirted by major companies for a very long time to rural areas in America, throughout America. And it isn't just the Wild West where it isn't. There are plenty of New England locations that are in that same boat. And so I do think this is going to put different pressure on those corporations to create a digital America that didn't exist before, in a holistic way. Um, but you touch on this issue of Wi-Fi because it's also part of the equity issue. And I do think that that's a piece of what we're talking about here, equity online, in terms of teaching. And um, one of the things that I think is an issue, with all due respect to faculty and staff who have to suddenly start doing things online, it isn't just the professor in X department that's teaching. There's a student who can't graduate, even with a virtual graduation, because their financial aid has a problem. And so now you have to have financial aid officers who can manage a Zoom conversation with a student because the student can't come to campus. And so you have faculty that may have been resisting this, but who's going to train them up? Who's giving them the technology from their house to make it work? Who's going to make sure that everyone who has to do this can connect into the university's various, multiple digital systems? Because my experience on campuses, I can name 3, that the systems didn't talk to each other correctly. It isn't that you have one nice, clean, universal system at an institution. Often they've been cobbled together. And so I think that creating an equitable experience for students and for staff and for faculty is a major challenge going forward.
I think so. And I think, we won't have time to talk about it now, but I think, when we talk about inclusive teaching and making sure, then, we frankly haven't designed, most of our online experiences have been little more than swapping out the overhead projector of the old days, I remember, for projecting onto this Zoom space. We haven't thought about students with different learning needs. We haven't thought about different learning preferences, learning styles. There's a whole art to the pedagogy of teaching in virtual and digital spaces that we just haven't scratched the surface on. And I think there are probably bigger players that I would want to learn from, and maybe they've done some of the heavy lifting for us in terms of producing content, and then we help in different ways about that. But it's making me think too that you mentioned faculty and staff there. It's making me think there's also issues there, because typically, and I know this is not the case everywhere, but typically we will have older staff and faculty, maybe carrying some comorbidities, that place them at risk. They probably do have the luxury of having a safe space to work, although clearly there are some domestic violence issues and relationship and just the pressures of childcare and trying to teach with a 4-year-old on your lap or something. But I think there are some health and safety issues around staff and faculty that worry me. And it might be not just now, how are they coping now, and how are we creating a sense of community, and all the issues we touched on, like mental health and social isolation, but also maybe when we come back onto campus, how are we going to, I don't know, how are we going to exercise social isolation when we've got a group of, fresh 18-year-olds and, 60, 70-year-old faculty who are more at risk, as you know, the COVID epidemiologists will tell us, the older person with underlying comorbidities is more at risk at the moment than the younger person. So I think just having that multi-generational campus is gonna take some thinking about.
Well, and I do think that if we talk about returning to campus briefly, this is going to be a project management explosion to try and navigate, choreograph, and create the social architecture necessary to keep all the people safe you've just described, people that are in high-risk situations, and to also manage college students and college student behavior. College student behavior is not something easily managed. And 18-year-olds really want to be 18-year-olds, and that does not involve following a lot of rules all the time. Granted, they are mostly quite well behaved, but what we have to worry about now isn't negative behavior, it's what's reasonable behavior. Wanting to go over to see a friend, wanting to hug someone, wanting to slap someone on the back because the joke was funny. Thinking about behaviors that will put them at risk when they come back. And so there's a whole conversation we should have next time around how do you return to campus and how do you reintroduce everyone to what is a reimagined university space, because what we have known won't be able to be that way for a long time.
I think that's a good point to segue, because I mean, I'm keeping a list here of the additional budget requests that are going to be coming up, in a sense, you know, in this dialogue between President and Vice President Student Life. I mean, I'd just be looking at it and thinking, okay, we need more money for technology in terms of more investment. We've got more student and financial aid, because some of the things that were available and accessible on campus we need to recreate at some distance now, or find partnerships to do that with. We've got the, I think you're absolutely right, there's going to be another pandemic around mental health. I mean, that's my prediction. You know, I've already said that in other places around the prediction of loneliness as a massive public health issue, but
yes,
I think mental health coming through. And then we've seriously got to invest in pedagogy and helping to really leverage what the digital space is bringing us, because it isn't just a replacing the overhead projector, as I said. It is going to bring us some new ways of building deep learning experiences. But maybe we should move on a little bit around the community, because one of the things I think that's quite special about universities is it is a community of scholars. You've touched on this community of students. And obviously we have a community of people who enable all of that to happen in terms of the staffing, but how are we going to recreate community? Zoom isn't doing it for me. I don't know if it's doing it for you, but I'm, you know, turning up on time, I'm doing my stuff, but I'm not having any of those little sidebar conversations. I'm not having a quick coffee as I walk from one building to another, or, you know, I'm not getting any of that joy that comes from just being with people. I don't know what it feels like for you. How does it feel?
Well, it's interesting because just the other day I did a workshop for some student life professionals at another university, and I asked them halfway through the Zoom workshop, because my questions to them and what I was working on with them was, how are you maintaining community with students in this long distance arrangement? And it was a very different experience if they were extroverts or introverts. Mm-hmm. The extroverts were dying. They were just saying, this is so difficult for me. And the introverts were saying, I'm doing pretty okay with all of this. But I do think one of the things that you've touched on is something that we have to find a way to replicate even though it isn't happening naturally. What used to be called a water cooler conversations, where people would all go to the same watering hole on campus and have a little chat, or when you had mailboxes on campus, you would all go and gather in one place and bump into each other. There is no bumping into each other. In fact, we are not allowed to bump into each other anymore. And so we have to find a way to digitally bump into each other in a way that is legitimate and invigorating, because I do think that, and this is not just for us, which I think is very important, those of us that serve at a college or a university where you want to maintain your community within your department or within your colleagues in other departments, but helping students to maintain community among themselves even. The things that used to help them were if they belonged to a club, or they did things actively together, if they played a sport on campus. As university administrators, people are really in a position to try and help engineer some of that for them, because that's what helps bond them to the institution. That's what helps their positive experience. That's what builds them into loyal alums down the road. And so you want them to have a positive thing. And we didn't used to have to engineer it. But I think if we want them to have positive experiences, the same with staff, I think we have to engineer those moments for them as leaders within a university, because to fail to do that, I think will allow those relationships to erode and become quite two-dimensional, just about work and the task, and the human element will somehow just disappear or dissipate.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think, I feel a bit negative about the idea of socially engineering some of these things, just because it feels a bit false. But I know what you mean. But you're right, there are those moments, the water cooler moment that you touched on, and but also the sense that you can be in different tribes, with your clubs and societies and all of those things. I think it's really important. But I have seen some rather clumsy efforts about everybody coming online and saying what they're doing, and it all feels a bit fake, So
I agree.
But I agree that there needs to be something done there. But I hope it will make us, because we've moved from effectively a kind of high touch learning environment to a no touch learning environment, in one sort of jump. I hope, and I am quite an optimistic person, but I do hope that when we move back into whatever the new normal is, and maybe we should touch on that, what you think are, beyond the crisis, let's look beyond this crisis in the recovery. But I hope it will make us value some of those things. I mean, I know I am missing out on live music. I'm missing out on my ballet session, in terms of going to the ballet. I'm missing out on lots of social things. Some of the things we're doing online, like we've had our virtual book club, they felt really good. And so I think there's some elements of engineering that, which I would agree with you. But maybe we should touch on the next steps when, what will fall 2020 look like? What's your prediction of fall 2020?
Well, I think you're the one that said that Cambridge has announced that they are not going to go back. Is that correct?
Yeah, Cambridge University in the UK has already said they will be doing nothing on campus in terms of student teaching for the whole of next academic year.
And then Cal State has said that they will do only online, predominantly. And so I think that they are certainly both leaders in the field, if you will, and they're setting a tone that is worth watching from my perspective. You have other articles I've read have shown that some colleges are starting in August, maybe slightly earlier than they would have, and they are stopping at Thanksgiving, and everything after Thanksgiving, if there is anything after Thanksgiving, will be done from home. They don't want students to go home, pick up all the viruses, and bring them all back to their campuses from wherever they've gone home to. And so the semesters will end in November rather than in December, effectively. And so I do think that there will be some institutions that are having people come back, but I have not been able to read anything that effectively describes how they are going to position students on campus. I know that the vast majority of housing in this country has double rooms or triple rooms. And so that would be out of the question at this point, unless you are going to provide, what did you say about weekly temperature readings or testing?
Yeah, I
Um,
read a startling figure that was actually in the California system. So they were saying that uh, all the students in the California state system, if they did just one weekly test, yeah,
yes.
it would cost $25 million a week. So
Right, so that's for one state for 1 week. And
one
if you're
state
a
for 1 week.
15-week semester or a 16-week semester,
So
you're
it's not going
looking,
to fly.
no, of course not. But it becomes evident the truth of what level of safety has to happen. And one of the things that I think we have to be honest about is not every faculty member or staff member or student is going to want to come back physically to campus. I think that I read a recent article saying that students surveyed in several places indicated they don't trust that their university will keep them safe. They don't have confidence about the university's commitment or ability to really sanitize and effectively do what has to be done to make them feel safe. And even if it isn't the student's desire, the student may want to go, the parents may not let them go if it's a traditional age student. So I think opening up is going to be multifaceted. I think there will be those who go straight in and have their on campus everything, let the chips fall where they may, if you will, if people get sick. I think there will be some of those. I think there will be the careful and conservative approaches that we've seen from Cal State. And then I think there will be, in the middle, a variety of options. I do think, though, if you do the common sense thing, we really need a set of guidelines for higher education to follow, or any residential educational space to follow, whether it's CDC guidelines or whatever, because we need a source of authority. We need something that says, this is what we consider to be safe. And then as a college or a university, we need to follow it, because frankly, otherwise there'll be lawsuits morning, noon, and night if someone becomes sick. Because if there were guidelines and we failed to follow them, it would expose us to that liability. Not to mention, we'd let people get sick unnecessarily. So,
Yeah, but I think it's going to be really difficult. I mean, there was an interesting, statistic from a study that was saying Columbia University, a typical student there, in a week would come into contact somewhere in the region of 500 other people.
absolutely.
And that wasn't counting, it wasn't counting dorms, cafeterias, or gyms. So you can double, triple that number.
Absolutely.
So that idea of contact tracing, that's gone out the window. Testing, we've touched on that, $25 million a week. That's not going to fly. We don't have a vaccine. We don't really have, even on the testing side, there are still lots of false positives, false negatives, people who are super carriers, super spreaders, and all of that stuff. I don't really want to get into the whole biology of it, but, I think the idea of risk mitigation is going to be really tough. I can't believe, frankly, that there will be universities going back full in thinking, this is all about herd immunity and just thinking about it without really understanding the risks that they're putting their staff and their whole institutions. Do you want to be the COVID university, the COVID pandemic center? The issue for me is how different the universities and colleges are. Some are commuter schools, some are these on-campus, immersive in institutions. Some states have really high infection and death rates, some states don't. And I think you're seeing that, I know in the United Kingdom, you're seeing the same. You know, some cities and towns pretty clear, others less so. So, you know, it's all linked with poverty, crowding, numbers, etc. So I think there's some big issues. So I guess we'll be saying, you know, somewhere between nobody coming back, everybody coming back, and somewhere in the middle is kind of going to be the issue. But let's talk about that, you know, coming back, not necessarily for full 2020, but the idea of permanent adaptations to higher education, because I think this is showing us that the higher education tuition-based model, there's no way anyone is going to pay online for, you know, or pay for an online experience what they would be paying for this full campus experience with the clubs and societies and all the everything else. So I think, you know, what are those permanent adaptations, and how do we, as we touched on it at the beginning, we touched on the equity issues, how are we going to build back better? How are we going to make sure that some of these things that we've lived with or tolerated or simply ignored get swept up, and we don't just try and recreate them, but we build back better, and we actually capture some of these adaptations?
Well, you know, there are two things that come to mind immediately when you say that. One adaptation that would be fabulous would be if online teaching took on the concept of universal design for instruction. And universal design for instruction is the idea that everyone in the classroom can learn very well if you follow this methodology that is the best methodology for students that have a learning disability. And it recognizes that not everyone is an auditory learner and not everyone is a visual learner, and it recognizes that, and it allows for everyone to get into the academic experience in the best way possible. And if we were training modules or creating preparation guidelines for faculty to adapt everything to an online methodology, creating that kind of framework is a not just a step forward, it is a light year leap forward in how well we would be educating students in terms of effectiveness and leveling the playing field for students that have different needs. The other, and that's something that could be in the new reimagined university that's digital. The other piece of this is that what we're doing now doesn't have to go away. I don't think it has to be either or. I don't think it has to be, oh, we immediately did online, and then when we finally do get a vaccine, we go back to the old way. I think it can be that plus. You know, right now, if you're running some digital experiences, let's say outside the classroom for students, whether it's little workshops on mental health and stress, or it's fun things that Student Life might do on how to get students to relax a little bit, and they have an online comedian and just students from your university participate. Well, you probably always had that comedian come to campus and do an event, but you never videoed it, you never streamed it, you never made it accessible for the adult student who has children at home and can't get away to come to campus, or for the student that has a mobility issue and can't come back to campus at that hour to see it, or the student that's taking too many classes and can't watch it at that time, but could watch it later if it was taped. And so we should be capturing some of the great benefits of this moment and contributing that into the pot next time and saying, we're going to do this differently next time. If we're going to have a comedian, we're going to always video stream it. We're going to always do it this way, because it enhances how many people can get engaged in it. So I think there are some things we need to be thinking about as a redesign, a reimagining of it. And one other piece is, if we really do need to distance for a while, then we cannot put the same number of people on a property in the same 8 hours. We're going to have to say, we can do this over 12 hours or 16 hours. We're going to have classes at night and on weekends. And we can't say that the old idea of 8 to 4 teaching is what we will be teaching. Flexibility in what we used to think was absolute is the key, in my mind. What about yourself? You must be thinking of ways to reimagine.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the sector, the kind of broader sector. And, I've said this for a long time now, but the idea of differentiating your institution, not trying to be all things to all people. So I do think we will see a greater focus on what are we famous for, what's our purpose, what are we great at, what are we the only place that does this. So I think that sense of focus. So I think you will see consolidation, and I mean in terms of programs, I think in terms of courses, I think actually in terms of institutions. I think you're going to see consolidation of the sector as people differentiate. They've made a prediction, I think, that it's 1 in 5 US colleges and universities is at risk. So I think there will be consolidation.
I think that will be new partnerships or one college buying another. What's your imagination?
Yeah, I mean, it could be failures, mergers, acquisitions. It could be, I don't necessarily think it means having a giant sort of monolithic one college, but it might be that, small boutique institutions will still sustain because of the quality and distinctiveness of what they do. But I think there'll also be a sense of sharing. One of the things that's been really positive about this, and I chaired a panel just yesterday actually with 7 university presidents, but was this idea that they are sharing. They're sharing their concerns, they're sharing their anxieties, but actually more importantly, they're sharing solutions. They're sharing their sense of the importance of the higher education sector, and therefore they want to come through this together. And so I think that's very positive. So I think that will be a positive outcome. And I think the last thing would be how we help get the economy back up and running. So in previous, and I made the distinction earlier, I think, about this isn't a typical recession. We didn't see the leading indicators of a recession. This is a repression because of the health crisis to manage that. But I think we will see a greater interest in credentials, professional qualifications, helping get the economy back up and running, because whatever's said, those who are most at risk are those without a college degree. It does give you the resilience in the job market. It will, and I think we should be helping our graduating class of 2020 get into this job market. So I think that's going to be it. So maybe just as we close out, any final comments from you, and then I think we'll finish up.
No, I think next time we should talk about the real reimagined university, because I think we only had a chance to touch on it here, but I don't think we're going to ever be exactly the same.
Yeah, I agree.
Not sure that's bad.
Yeah, I think, I'm always, as I say, optimistic, but this, the world has shifted on its axis. I think some of the things, as we said earlier, some of the things that weren't good have been revealed and shown up, and we should pay attention. Some of the things that are really precious, again, will sustain, but we do need to reimagine. And I think, yes, let's take that as our next topic. So final comment from me is, a quote that they talk about as forecasting is hard, especially the future. And I think I really feel that for the moment. So my prediction is more uncertainty ahead. But there is something that I really like this quote. I like quotes, but this was from Francis of Assisi saying, start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, and suddenly you're doing the impossible. And I think that is a good guide for us as we think about the higher education sector. So I really appreciate the conversation, Maureen. And
I appreciate it with you.
Putting our old hats back on and thinking about what would we do.
Exactly.
So talk to you next time. Thank you.
Good speaking with you.